Hi, I'm Dr. John McClanahan. I'd like to welcome everyone to our four-part series dealing with tools for staying sober, or as I like to look at it, is Now What Do I Do? Thank you and enjoy. Well, I want to welcome everybody back. We're going to do part two of What Do I Do Now, where we're looking at tools for staying sober and kind of some of the techniques that we can use to not only gain our sobriety, but also help maintain. And I had mentioned just briefly a few of these. Now we're going to look at a little bit of detail with some of these. One of the things that we had talked about as an option is inpatient treatment. And inpatient treatment goes by a lot of different types and forms. There's 28-day, 30-day, the traditional inpatient facility. And now we have facilities that are kind of extending that stay a little bit. We have 60-day, we have 90-day. We have variations of that, where some is transitional living and the person lives off campus. They've gone through the original 20 or 38 or 30 days, and now they're going to do some on-site aftercare and that type of thing. So 30, 60, 90 is kind of the standard. I'm going to mention in a minute there's some other options. Or you can certainly go into detox, get through the medical portion of this, and then shift into something else. The reason I underline this, and again, I'm always looking for examples that I can use. And unfortunately, it was a prime example came to me last night. So I was watching TV, and some of you might know this. Anybody, and again, this is for folks that whoever's going to be viewing this and watching this, please, whatever you do, don't try to detox yourself at home. You know, I know it's one of those things, it almost sounds like a bad car commercial, where you see at the bottom, done by stunt drivers, don't try this at home kind of thing. Dead serious about that. And I've had people in the past say, well, I've done it lots of times. You never know when it can go horribly wrong. Alcohol is the only drug you can die in withdrawals from. Other drugs might feel like it. There's an old story we used to tell, and it might sound a little tacky to people, but I think it gets the point across. Years ago, we used to talk about take 10 alcoholics and put them in a room, take 10 heroin addicts and put them in another room, come back a week later, what you would see is 10 mad as hell heroin addicts and a couple of dead alcoholics. Because of blood pressure problems, because of seizures, because of stroke, that type of thing, it is so dangerous to detox at home by yourself. I can handle this. I'm just not going to drink or use. Okay? The reason I said this is a very critical piece, you might have heard the other last night, Amy Winehouse that just died, the entertainer that just died a little while ago. Everything was kind of out for the autopsy results weren't back in yet. And they said last night that they've issued a partial preliminary statement. And what they said was they have pretty good evidence that she died from seizures trying to detox herself at home. And again, there's one of those that just slams you right in the face, that don't try this at home. People would say, again, it's never, it has to start somewhere. Just because a person said I could detox myself without anybody's help and nothing happened, okay? It's always that first time, and that's all it takes is that one time, and it can end very badly. And again, it sounds like, unfortunately, in her case, that's exactly what the preliminary report is saying, that it was seizures that were that developed in early withdrawal, trying to do it at home. And a lot of times people say, I don't want anybody to know, or I can't let anybody know this is my 423rd attempt. I'll just handle this at home and that kind of thing. For your own safety, please don't do that. There's a lot of other ways we can do this. You can do inpatient detox for a few days. You can do outpatient detox. There's ways to handle this, but it's a medical condition that needs medical attention, plain and simple. When we talk about inpatient, one of the biggest factors for people is money. How much is it going to cost? And it's like anything else, using a car as an example. You know, you can buy you know, kind of a secondhand old clunker for a couple $100, couple $1,000, or you can spend $80,000 or $90,000 for a car. Treatment is like that too. You know, there's all different varieties. Very often, if they don't say it up front, a lot of treatment programs, if insurance and that type of thing is a problem, a lot of treatment programs will try to work something out. In fact, there's even a few treatment programs that I do work with that have even instituted now a payment plan. Just like, again, having a car loan or paying a mortgage. You don't have to plunk it all down at one time or hope insurance covers it. They'll work with you. So there's all different varieties of situations. Anything, like I said, from $5,000 to $80,000, depending on what you think you need. So inpatient is certainly a good alternative or a good option. But like I said in the last segment, it still all starts with just for today. Okay? Then we have another variation that's fairly new. A couple treatment programs have done this for a while, but a lot of them are starting to do this, where it's a longer term thing, maybe 9 months to a year, where you're in primary treatment for maybe 30 days, maybe 60 days, and then you go into transitional living, you know, an Oxford house, a recovery house, the sober house type of thing. So that's another option. Inpatient is very, very critical if the person has a history of medical complications. You know, if they've had a history of inpatient or outpatient maybe wasn't as successful as they would have liked it to have been, or they need some medical stabilization first, okay? Inpatient very often, and outpatient as well, is one of those things that this is where the person gets sober. This is where the foundation is laid. This is where the person gets stable. And then we have some other things we use to continue that sobriety. So again, inpatient is always a good alternative and option. A number of years ago, and I think one of the things that I tell folks that today's a good time, anytime's a good time to come into recovery, but now we've got so many options, so many things we didn't have before. And I think very often, sometimes we take for granted what is available. You know, people you pretty much can fall out of bed and find a meeting. You know, I love it when patients of mine tell me, yeah, I'd like to go to meetings, but I can't find one. And I say, well, you're not looking very hard. They're everywhere. Between Annapolis and DC and Baltimore, kind of that triangle, there's over 800 AA meetings in the area. And that's not including NA meetings, CDA meetings, Al-Anon. Okay? All these things, you know, are certainly a critical part of this. So again, we take for granted what we do today. Outpatient, as an example, what I provide, again, a lot of times people take it for granted because they think it's been there forever. Well, outpatient has been around for a while, but it's about 30 years old, and it's not even in the same form it was in when I first got sober. So it's constantly kind of morphing and changing itself to meet the needs and schedules of the people that it serves. We have a couple of different options for outpatient. One is basic education. If you were here, again, when we did the initial part of this series, is or is I ain't. You know, a lot of times people will come into the basic education groups that I do, even though maybe some are coming in as a result of some legal intervention, maybe a DWI or a possession charge or something along those lines. Very often I'll have somebody that comes in to do the education sessions for what we used to call pre-treatment, where a person would come in and I think it's a problem, but how severe? Or I'm pretty sure it's a problem, what do I do with it? So an education program is a great way, if you're faced with making a decision. Come in, take a look, do a is or is I ain't. There's a lot of variations of this, okay? There's a couple of week program, There's a couple of months program that most facilities throughout the country offer. Then there's a longer term that could be 6 months to a little longer than that. So again, the education kind of gives you that look in the mirror. I tell folks all the time that one of the things that I want my education groups to be able to do is be able to make a decision about their situation based on facts, not feelings. Come in and take a look, see what it looks like. If you were here when we did the is I is or is I ain't, you might remember I started off with a little segment to introduce that with something I call demythifying addiction. And I had mentioned I'm a firm believer in order to understand what something is, it's also important to understand what it's not. Because if you've got a stereotype or a picture in your mind of what the addict is or what he or she looks like, and now you're being asked to make a determination, are you one? Well, if that frame of reference is wrong, your decision's probably going to be wrong as well. We talked about addiction has nothing to do with what the person's doing, when they do it, where they're doing it, and that on and on and on. It has everything to do with how it affects them when they do it. And I always mention to any group, whether it's a treatment group, an education group, a civic group, 98% of the addicted population looks like me. It doesn't look like the bum in the gutter and the bag lady. Some of us, that's where it ends up. But 98% look just like me. And I always remind people it looks like anybody sitting here. It could be all of you. It could be none of you. But there's nobody in here that looks like the stereotype. Okay? So education gives a person that option and that opportunity to make a decision based on facts, not feelings. A couple of types of outpatient programs you see, and this is one that's undergone a few changes over the years. There's IOP, intensive outpatient. That's probably gone through the most drastic change over the years. When I first got sober, the program that I was involved with was a hospital-based program, and it's what we came to know as a heavy front-loaded program. And basically what that meant was we were in group 5 nights a week for 5 weeks. And after that 5 weeks was 1 night a week aftercare for up to a year and a whole lot of meetings in between. It was 5 nights a week for 5 weeks. Each session was 3 to 4 hours long, depending on what it was we were doing and how quick we got it done. Well, outpatient today, intensive outpatient, doesn't take on that look anymore. Now, basically, and it's based on an insurance explanation, intensive outpatient is 9 hours a week or more. So theoretically, you could go 1 time a week for 9 hours, or you could go 3 times a week for 3 hours. So it's some variation of 9 hours or more. So that's what intensive outpatient focuses on now. Then we have some other variations. There's relapse prevention groups. In my relapse groups, we always start off with the same couple of minutes and tell people in those sessions what we focus on is triggers, traps, stuck points. Again, if a person goes to AA or NA, we know them in there as slippery people, places, and things. I'm a firm believer that awareness is the key to prevention. The more you know about something, the better chance you have of dealing with it. So much of prevention is recognition. What's in my bag of tricks here? And then we have to come up with techniques on how to deal with it. How do we turn the volume down on those triggers? So relapse prevention focuses strictly on that. And very often relapse prevention is for people who have had periods of sobriety and they're coming back in to fine-tune those skills and that type. What went wrong? Haven't quite figured out what it is I need to do, but I'm starting to figure out what I don't need to do. So we kind of focus on that there. Continuing care, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I tell people continuing care is like relapse prevention graduate school. In there, we take those techniques. Excuse me, there's an old saying again in meetings about so much of sobriety is about learning to accept life on life's terms. And for most of us, we have to figure out what are those terms. What are the rules of the road? What is it I need to do? So we focus on that. So there we really fine-tune what's going on. Then we have other therapy. And I kind of group that together. marriage counseling, couples counseling, grief counseling, pastoral counseling, whatever else a person needs. It's another thing I'm a firm believer in. Please don't ever let somebody convince you that if somewhere in your sobriety you start to realize you might need a little bit more help and assistance in another area in your life, please don't ever let anybody convince you that's a sign of weakness. I hear it all the time. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. When somebody starts to recognize what I'm doing to deal with this area of my life, things are coming together really well, but I need some help here. Okay? It's not a sign of weakness. Okay? So other therapy, if you need to see a social worker, you need to see a marriage counselor, you need to see, again, all the above, whatever it is to take care of other issues in your life. The more you focus on, in fact, if you look at the word that all of us should be hopefully focused on, the word serenity. In groups very often I talk about the difference between quantity of sobriety versus quality. And I always mention quantity is a wonderful thing, but quality is what we should be looking for. And it's what we deserve. We deserve the quantity, but we deserve the quality. Unfortunately, you hang around sober people long enough, you're going to run into somebody that's been sober forever and then the most miserable person you ever met. You're also going to run into somebody that's been sober for 30 days and they just glow. And they'll tell you, I don't know what it is, but I want more of it. Quantity does not necessarily breed quality. Quality, I think, will always breed quantity. If you like what you're doing, you're going to want more of it. If you don't, you're going to find 9,000 ways to get out of doing it. And a lot of us have firsthand experience with that over the years. So again, whatever you can do to increase that quality, we talk about, again, the word that most of us are looking for, and that's the word serenity. And serenity is just another name for balance, harmony, peace of mind. All the pieces are starting to click together. Okay? As an example, when we talk about having all these things involved, if you look at a car or any engine, you've got a 6 or 8 cylinder car. If it's tuned, everything's going to run smoothly. It's going to give you good performance, good gas mileage. It's going to get you where you need to be worry-free. Pull a plug wire, knock one of those cylinders offline. The car will run, but it just won't be as efficient. It'll run rough. The gas mileages, it might let you down when you least expect it, but it'll run. Pull another plug wire. Now you're running on 6 cylinders or 4 cylinders, depending on what. It'll still run, but it's going to be really, really rough. Eventually, you pull enough plug wires, nothing's going to happen. Everything has to be in sync. In fact, one of the parts on the front of the engine where the pulley attaches to the crankshaft that controls the internal workings of an engine that the pistons are attached to, it's called a harmonic balancer. And that's what keeps everything in harmony, in focus, everything in sync. Okay? When all the areas of our lives are starting to kind of function as best as possible, because I don't think they ever function, everything is perfect. But I think if everything is in as much balance as it can, you're going to have the quality in your life. So serenity very often comes from looking at other areas. Also, if you look at addiction as a multifaceted illness, we talk about addiction in terms of it's physical, emotional, and spiritual, or body, mind, emotion, and soul. If the illness is multifaceted, recovery has to be as well. It's not just about not drinking or using or gambling or whatever our issue is. It's about emotional recovery, spiritual recovery, sometimes financial recovery, legal recovery, relationship recovery. Okay. In fact, we even have a term for it when those things aren't in sync with each other. It's called the dry drunk syndrome. And basically that means the person is not using, which again, don't hear me wrong, I'm not downplaying that, but that's where it starts. That's not the end of the process, that's the beginning. And if we need other therapies to pull all that stuff together, take advantage of that. Again, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And it's a sign of growth and a sign of recovery. So again, these are some of the outpatient options that we have. I want to spend the rest of the time focused on probably the most used, the most been around the longest. Some of you might be familiar with this. And those deal with 12-step meetings. Again, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Chemical Dependence Anonymous, Al-Anon, any of the self-help groups. Okay? There's a lot of different types of meetings, and like I said earlier, I'm a firm believer in mix and match. And again, I think sobriety and recovery and what we use to gain and maintain sobriety is like water. It's going to seek its own level. You're going to find what's comfortable for you. But I think the more we look and the more we try different things, the better chance we have of finding what's going to fit for us. There's a lot of different types of meetings. There's speakers meetings, there's discussion meetings, there's step meetings, there's tradition meetings, there's big book meetings. All those have a particular focus. Speakers meetings, very simply, in fact, a lot of people when they first come into recovery or want to start taking a look at going to meetings, that can be the most comfortable because you don't have to say anything. Speakers meetings, you sit and a man or woman tells his or her story. Or maybe you have two speakers and they tell their stories. And it gives you an opportunity to kind of identify in. Okay? When you start to hear this, I was telling folks not too long ago, a lot of us learn in different ways. We're getting ready to start in my education group, we're going to start taking a look at signs and symptoms, is I is or is I ain't. And I mentioned in there that one of the most important things for us is to figure out how we learn best. Most of us learn in two ways. We can either read about something or we need to experience it. I've mentioned a number of times before, give me a technical manual on how to do something. Come back a week later and I'm dumber than before you gave it to me. I don't learn that way anymore. Flow chart, A follow, B follows A follows. Show me how to do it. I'll pick it up, almost instantly. Some people read about it, some people have to see it. A speaker's meeting gives you that opportunity. Some people can get a copy of the big book, again, kind of AA's Bible, and in the back there's all kinds of great stories to help people identify in. Well, very easily, some people might be able to read that and say, yeah, that's me, I've done that. But sometimes if you hear somebody and you see it in their life, kind of the format and the formula in a speaker's meeting is the person talks about how it was, how it is now, and the most important part is what I did to get there. What's the bridge in between? Okay? So that's a very good, speakers meetings gives us that option. Then there's discussion meetings, where again there's a particular topic, and the person chairing the meeting gives his or her take on that for a couple of minutes, and then you go around the room. And everybody kind of throws their take and their opinion and success or lack of success with that particular topic. It's a great way to learn. There's step meetings, where each meeting they focus on a particular step of the 12 steps. There's tradition meetings. You don't see those as often as you used to, where they focus on each one of the traditions. In fact, I used to tell people all the time, the steps is what keeps us sober, the traditions is what keeps the group sober. And that's kind of the overriding principles. And then there's big book meetings, again, it's almost kind of like Bible study or a reading group where everybody reads and comes back and talks about a chapter that they've read. So there's a lot of different options. Years ago, you used to have smoking meetings, non-smoking. Now, pretty much, I don't think there are any smoking meetings around anymore. So that's an option that's not there. There's men only. There's stag meetings. There's women only. There's meetings in Spanish. There's a meeting here in town that's in Greek. I mean, there's one of those. Again, if somebody says, I can't find a meeting that fits my particular needs, they're not looking real hard. There's something that's going to fit everybody's particular need. So again, all these types are there to give a person, again, set the table. You take what you want and you leave the rest. And if you're still hungry, you go back and get some more. A couple of philosophies that I want to look at in the rest of this segment that deal strictly with 12-step recovery, with going to meetings. And I think, again, these are great tools for staying sober. They take a little bit of work, take a little bit of time, but they certainly have some positive outcome. Some of them you might be familiar with, some you might have never heard, some you might not know why they do this. And again, for a lot of folks that might be watching this, you may have no exposure to any of this. Might be your first look at anything in terms of tools for staying sober. Maybe you wanted to go to meetings and you just were afraid. Maybe you wanted to go to meetings, but everybody, it's like speaking a foreign language. A lot of people, and I did this too, first meeting I ever walked into, I felt like, odd man out, because it's like everybody knew what was going on but me. Well, then you find out later on that that's not the case. You're not by yourself, but there's that feeling, there's that sense. There's a couple of things that are very, very critical, again, in terms of 12-step recovery. And it certainly can be across the board, not just in meetings, but in outpatient as well. One, it's been a mystery to a lot of people. You'll hear this very often, especially if a person's come out of an inpatient facility. One of the things that's on their treatment plan is 90 meetings in 90 days. Okay? And people look at that, and 90 meetings in 90 days is not something that treatment facilities came up with. This is an AA principle, AA philosophy. And people look at that, and I've had people over the years say, where did they come up with that number? Did somebody do the research and realize 89 wasn't enough, 91 was too many? That 90 meetings in 90 days is an arbitrary, but not really. The first 90 days of sobriety for most people is the most difficult. There's a condition we talk about in treatment all the time. It's called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And it's kind of like the aftershocks after the earthquake. They're normal things that are going to happen in the course of the person's early recovery. Some are physical, some are emotional. Can't sleep, dreams are vivid, and short-term memory's a problem. All these kinds of things. Well, in the first couple of months, this is where the brain's starting to recalibrate itself. So very often, what I need the most of is what I'm going to have the least of. And if what I need the most of is what I'm going to have the least of, I need to find it somewhere. And most of us find it in going to meetings, going to treatment, having that constant contact with people. So 90 meetings in 90 days is important. Also, it's not an arbitrary. I had a guy, years ago tell me, he said, I had an option of going to jail or getting sober. He said, this 90 meetings, and he said, I should have gone to jail. And it's like, if you got that opinion, then maybe you need to keep coming back. You need to keep looking at this. Well, 90 meetings in 90 days is there for another reason. Purely simple. Everybody in here knows the philosophy. The more you throw against the wall, the more chance you have of something's going to stick. Okay? I've had people say, I started going to meetings, and oh my God, it's so repetitious. It's so repetitious for a couple of reasons. The main reason is one of the last things that comes back online in early recovery is short-term memory. I need to hear something over and over and over again, just in case it might stick. The more you do it, the better chance you have of making this thing work. I'll give you an example. Might sound a little corny to people, but suppose everybody's sitting here. Suppose this is you made a decision not too long ago to learn how to read. And everybody comes together as the first class, and we're all sitting around, and the teacher comes in, and he or she says, best decision you ever made. This is going to take you farther than you ever could imagine. We're going to start, before we learn to read, there are 26 principles you have to learn, and we call them the alphabet. And you're going to come to group 26 weeks, okay? And each week, we're going to learn one of those principles. And everybody's sitting there going, okay, here we go. And then, you're thinking, this is going to be great, finally doing it. And then you go around the room for an hour. It sounds like Sesame Street. A, at, long A, short A. And then the teacher at the very end says, next week we're going to talk about the letter B. I can guarantee you about 4 weeks into that, and you realize we're on the letter D and there's 22 more of these things to go. Good God, I'm never going to learn how to read. I'll be here 6 months before we even... Half the people are going to bail out. You're coming one time a week, okay, for an hour. Suppose some of you stick it out. Now it's week 27 and you think, well, we got all those things handled. Here we finally go. And the teacher says, you did really well. Thanks for hanging in there. Now tonight, we're going to learn how to put those letters into little words. In, at, the. And you're thinking, good God, this could last forever. When are we going to learn? After you've done it, a few of us stick it out. Then the teacher says, now next week we're going to do something special. We're going to put those little words into little sentences. Kind of the see Dick run, you know, the old McGuffey reader kind of thing. Most of us at this point is going to bail out and say, you know what? I don't need to learn how to do this. My God, I'll die before we finally get around to reading a paragraph. It's why you go to school hours and hours and hours, days and days and days, for years. Okay? If we went once a week, once a month, we'd give up on it very, very quickly. The more we do it, the more it becomes a part of us. 90 meetings in 90 days gives us that option. Gives us that opportunity. It also gives us the opportunity to figure out what's going to work best. In 90 days, you can go to speakers meetings, you know, women-only meeting. Well, some of you can. We're not, you know. I sent a guy, poor guy, not too long ago, and I forgot. There is a great, great meeting on Wednesday night on Bestgate Road. I hear some of the greatest stories about that meeting. And he asked me, he said, I work at the mall, and he said, I work in the evening. Can I, you know, is there me? I could go like on my lunch hour, my dinner hour. I said, you're right across the street. There's a great meeting. And I forgot it was the Wednesday night women's group. And he came back and told me, he said, you know, it was a great meeting, except I couldn't stay. I said, well, what happened? Did you have to go back? He goes, they wouldn't let me stay. I'm thinking, what kind of AA is that? He goes, Dr. John, it's a women's, it's like, oh my God, I forgot. One of the best women's groups in the area, and I forgot. It was just that little brain fart that happened, and I forgot. So in 90 meetings in 90 days, you get to experience a lot of different things to find out what's going to work best. One of the things that we talk about often in meetings is finding a home group. You know, a meeting that if I can only get once a week, that's the one. It's where we're most comfortable. It's where we feel like our roots are. You know, that doesn't demean all the other meetings. It's just that's the one that I really feel most connected to. So again, that gives you an opportunity to do all that. Okay? There's another situation that we talk about in meetings, but you also hear it in treatment too. That's the idea of telephone therapy. Telephone therapy's been around since the invention of the telephone, I'm sure. A couple of things with this. I think telephone therapy is probably one of the easiest tools we have to access and the most difficult to use. There's an old joke, and it shows you how old this is and how I'm getting older than I'd like to think. There's an old joke in AA about every alcoholic has a telephone that has a 500-pound receiver. Okay? Can't quite pick it up. I had a young guy who was doing this in group one night, and I said something about a 500-pound receiver. And he raised his hand. He said, I don't mean to interrupt, but what's a receiver? And I thought, man, I'm getting old. I'm going to have to come up with some kind of cell phone, you know, type of... He didn't have a clue. And wasn't being funny or flip about it. He never had a phone like that. So you have to come up with some other, but the principle's still the same. I've got the option, it's there, but it's one of the most difficult things to engage. I had a guy years ago used to flaunt in group. He had a little book that he swore it had 600 numbers in it. And he would brag about, I've got every sober person in Anne Arundel County in here, so I'm well protected. Well, people used to tell him, you might want to cool your jets a little bit there, and just almost kind of bordered on being arrogant about it. Well, he was always the kind of guy that was fashionably late. Okay? Now, some of you know with my sense of timing, okay, there's 3 kinds of time. Okay? There's real time, there's addict time, and people talk about, and then there's McClanahan time. Okay? Procrastination is still something I work with. But anyway, he would come into group 45 minutes late just so he could saunter in, and it's like, okay, I'm here now. Now we can do some real work. Well, this one particular day, he came in early, didn't say a word, sat down. Everybody's walking in, and they wanted to say something to him because now they're looking at their watches like, oh my God, are we that late? He's already here. Nobody said a word, and he's just quiet as he could be. Well, everybody's here. We're finally getting ready to do the topic we're going to look at. And he said, can I say something before we start? And I said, sure. He said, I got to be honest with everybody. He said, I'm sure everybody's wondering why I'm so quiet. And he said, I got to be honest. He said, I went out over the weekend, was a cocaine addict. I went out, I got high, and I feel like crap. I'm ashamed, I'm embarrassed. I don't know what happened. Well, everybody was very polite, and a lot of times recovering folks circle the wagons. We're glad you're okay, we're that. But I knew what was eating at everybody because I wanted to ask the question too. But I thought, I'm just not going to, I'll let somebody else. Finally, somebody said, all right, if nobody else is going to ask, I'm going to do it. What happened to those 600 phone numbers you had in your pocket? I didn't call them. Why not? Honest to God answer. I didn't think anybody would be home. All 600 of them, okay? It's the easiest thing to access and the most difficult thing to implement. Having the tools and using the tools are light years apart. Telephone therapy is a wonderful thing. You call the person, and we have people we've met in meetings, people we've met in group. Anytime, and if somebody gives you a phone number, they give it for a reason. It's a win-win. They're not giving you, here's my number, now don't ever call me. Okay? It's not a popularity contest saying, yeah, I gave away my phone number 43 times tonight. I'm important. Okay? They're giving it because, first of all, it's going to help them a whole lot more than you might realize, and it's going to help you as well. So it's a win-win situation. One of the things that happens, again, the person has to call before they use. If a person calls, they're looking for solutions. If they call afterwards, Father Martin used to talk about this all the time. You call afterwards, you're looking for sympathy. I've had people tell me, I didn't want to, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, I didn't want to call you. I'm human, and everybody else is. If the phone rings at 2 in the morning, it's probably not good news, okay? But you answer the phone. I would much rather somebody call me at 2 o'clock in the morning to say, I'm getting ready to pick up, talk to me, than have them call me at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell me what they just did. Okay? You call beforehand. It's a preventative thing. We do it, everybody in here knows the old saying too about closing the barn door after the horse has gotten out. After a person's used, we certainly want to get them back into treatment, back in meetings, back to church, back on Medicaid, whatever it is they're doing. But that's damage control. That's not preventing anything. The person needs to call beforehand. Okay? A technique I learned a long time ago, and in case you ever are on the other end of this, either you're the calling party or you're the person receiving the call. There's a technique that some of us do, and I've been told before that people say, well, that's pretty heartless, but follow the logic. There's method to my madness with this. If somebody calls me and says, I'm getting ready to pick up a drink, or I really want to get high. Talk to me. Help me get through this. The first thing I do, and people think sometimes this is cruel, the first thing I do is change the subject. The last thing I want to talk to you about is your urge to use. And I might ask a couple of dumb questions. How about them O's? How about the weather? How about this? Did you survive the storm? How are the kids? Did you ever take that vacation? Well, people will look at that and say, my God, this person's on the other end of the phone saying, help me save my life, and you're talking about a damn ball game. Why'd they call you? There's a reason why. If somebody calls, more return to active use occurs in the panic of the moment. And very often when the person is in that state of mind where they're saying, please help me, here I go again, before we finish saying, here I go again, we're gone. There's a great psychobabbly term, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, but it's a great psychobabbly term. It's called delay plus behavioral alternative. If you put a delay, not yet, not yet, not yet, with a behavioral alternative, okay, it's a great clinical tool. But if you look at it, delay plus behavioral alternative means call your sponsor, say a prayer, run around the block, take a cold shower, anything to shift the focus. So now what I'm doing is shifting the focus. The person says, help me get through this. And I'll ask a million questions that have nothing to do with what's going on. Because I know in the panic of the moment, I could give them the best possible advice I can come up with. And if they're in that high idle mode, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. They're not going to hear a thing you say. After a couple minutes, you can hear the panic. The immediacy is starting to drop a little bit. Then I go back and I ask, okay, now you said you were getting ready to pick up. Now, I'm smart enough to know what answer I'm going to get. Okay? Do you still want to? Well, talking about a ball game for 5 minutes certainly isn't going to make that, but they've shifted the focus. Now what I hear is, well, yeah, but the panic's not there. Now you can give them the advice, and they'll probably hear it. Now, what they do with it, again, that's up to the individual. In the panic of the moment, you're probably not going to hear what you need to hear. As a personal example, a number of years ago, I had pneumonia, and I knew I was getting sick, but I didn't realize how sick. And I came and did my Saturday morning group that I do, and I was really struggling. I thought I was coming down with the flu or something. I was having trouble breathing. I'm starting to run a fever. I'm just feeling lousy. And I canceled the afternoon group and I went home. Well, later in the afternoon, I'm almost on the floor sucking air. I'm in real trouble. My wife calls 911. The firehouse is a couple of minutes away. So they were there almost immediately. And they come in, and I'm sitting in a chair in the living room, and I'm really struggling. I mean, it's like breathing through cement. And all I'm thinking about, not to be dramatic, but all I'm thinking about is this my last breath? Is this it? That kind of thing. Well, the fire department come in, and one of them made a comment, about, you're safe now, we're here. Kind of the cavalry's arrived and you're in good hands. Well, the rational part of my brain knows that. The irrational part of my brain is saying, do something. Hurry up. I'm not hearing what they're... So they're taking my vitals and they're doing all this stuff, and they finally decide they want to transport me to the hospital, and they're getting me ready for that. Of course, I've got the mask on, and they do just like when you go to the dentist. When you get everything in your mouth, that's when they ask you, how's the family? How are you? And of course, he's got, put the mask on, and he's asking me questions, and I'm struggling trying to breathe. I'm trying to answer, and all that's coming out is kind of... He starts to do an IV line to get me ready to go to the hospital, and he's telling me, he said, sir, you're going to be fine, okay? We got you. Okay? Well, I'm hearing it, but I'm not hearing it. Finally, he looks around the living room, and of course, you have cats, this example. One of our cats is laying over on the sofa, just could care less. I mean, the end of the world could be coming, and they're just, so what, And he asked me, he said, oh, you have cats. And it's like, uh-huh. I was like, what does that have to do with me? I can't breathe here. And he said, oh, how many do you have? And I'm fumbling with, 3, 4, 187, I don't. He goes, oh, that's good. My wife and I have cats. And it's like, oh, I can't breathe. Which one's your favorite? I'm going, what is this guy? It's probably well, after a couple minutes of those questions, now all of a sudden, I start to realize he got me. Because now I'm thinking about the cats, talking about which one's his favorite, what's that one's name over there. I'm not panicking. Now, he said, now we can do some work. I need you to do this, this, and this. And I did this, this, and this, and off we went. He had probably said we need to do this, this, and this 100 times before, and I didn't hear it because all I'm thinking about is do something. He was trying to. I just couldn't hear it. You shift the focus. Telephone therapy is a great way to get that handled. The easiest to access, but again, the most difficult to actually implement. It's all about call first. The last two on the list, I'll take a look at real quick. I think some of the best information that we have on addiction isn't written by Joe Blow, PhD, or some professional expert. I think some of the greatest tools that we have, the greatest literature we have, is literature that's written for meetings. Lots of good, what they call conference-approved, AA or NA approved information. I think it's so critical because it's written for us, by us. You don't see any degrees after it. And again, that's not down in the people that, I've got those too. But the thing that I think the most important thing that I can bring to the table is my recovery. The other stuff are just letters after my name. So again, stuff that we get, whether it's books, pamphlets, whatever it might be, AA, NA, CDA, Al-Anon, it's the best literature in the world. Okay? It's inexpensive. You look now and you not to mention, I guess this might be copyright infringement, but go to Borders. Okay? Borders is going out of business. And they're having 90% off right now. I mean, it's coming down to where, it was 10%, 9%. You go, it's 90% off. And you go and you look at a book and it's like, wow, 90% off. This is cool. I get this for a couple bucks. And then you realize the book's $70. Okay? The day of the $4 paperback is gone, that kind of thing. AA, NA, CDA literature hasn't raised its price very much in decades. And very often, if it's something there like a big book or some other form of recovery literature, very often, if you can't afford one, they'll give you one. All you got to do is ask. Or somebody will say, here, take mine. I used to love seeing this at meetings. One I used to go to years ago, and before we moved here, would have a drawing, like a raffle, at halftime in the meeting. And they would do it to help pay for coffee and rent for the bill. People forget that wherever meetings are, very often they're paying rent to be there. It's not a community service anymore, where the facility gives them the facility for an hour or two. And one of the prizes they would always give away at this little 50-50 drawing was a copy of the big book. And I used to love it when people would win that had been sober for a while and probably had 10 other copies. They didn't say, look what I won. They look for that new man or woman and give it to them. I mean, that's power in itself. AA and NA and CDA and Al-Anon and all the gambling and whatever, it's written for us, by us. There's a book I get every year. It's kind of a current trends in addiction. It's really meant more for a clinical piece, a lot of the biology and biochemistry and that kind of thing. It started out this big years ago. Now it's bigger than a telephone book. It's hundreds of dollars, thousands of pages. I look at knowledge and information in two forms. There's nice to know, and then there's need to know. This book is a great resource of enzyme pathways and in the liver and all this, scientific stuff. Thousands of pages, hundreds of dollars, not one page in there on how to get sober. It's nice to know stuff, but in terms of need to know, it's useless. Makes a great doorstop. Hundreds of bucks. Literature that you get in meetings and from sober people. It's written for us, by us. Okay? It's available. Years ago, trying to find information like that was rare. Now you can walk into a Borders or Barnes & Noble or any book, and there's whole sections on self-help. Years ago, if they had a section like that, literally, people would ask to have it put in a brown bag so nobody would see them walking out of the store with that, because somebody might think I have a problem. It's not like that anymore. The last one, very often you see it's a great tool for staying sober, and that's have a sponsor. I wanted to spend just a minute before we wrap this segment up. A lot of myths kind of revolve around what a sponsor is. A sponsor basically is somebody who has a little bit more sobriety than you have. They're a teacher, they're a guide. Now I'm showing my age too because this ad hadn't been around for years. They're not the Shell answer man. They're not somebody that's got all the answers to life's problems. They're not a bank. They're not an employment agency. They're not a babysitter. They're there to help you strengthen and continue your sobriety. They're a teacher. Very often there's a standing rule, written, unwritten, that a person to be a sponsor needs to be sober at least 2 years. Okay? And I think in most part that's pretty accurate. But again, I've seen too many times when somebody says, "You have a sponsor yet?" "Yeah, I sure do." "Who you got?" "Well, it's old Fred over there." "Well, gee, you and old Fred got out of rehab together. How's that working?" "Well, he and I relate." "Well, yeah, that's fine as friends, and you got to have somebody who's had a little bit more." It's an old saying, and this really sounds corny when you look at people who are getting somebody that new in their recovery to be their sponsor. It's an old thing in counseling. We talk about two sickies don't make a wellie. So you have to kind of really be careful with that. There has to be a period of sobriety for the person to be a sponsor. I also tell people, please, when you go to find a sponsor, audition him or her, because they're going to audition you. I've seen too many times somebody will say, "Well, I was told on my treatment plan, have a sponsor in 14 days. It's 13 and a half days. Oh my God, you'll do." Okay? It's nice to have a temporary sponsor. That's fine. But there's no time frame that says you better have one. You need one. Most of us need one. But there's no time frame. Have it or else. Okay? I've seen people say, "I heard him or her at a meeting last night, and they're my person." And then you find out you hit them on a good night. That one night they were spot on, and that's all they know. Listen to what the person has to say. Get an overall feel. Also, there's this huge problem with people thinking that if somebody's not sponsoring somebody, they must not be any good. Well, maybe nobody's ever asked them. Maybe you're the first person. I've also seen the other way. Go to meetings, you'll see this person, and I mean this in a loving way. Okay? I love people in meetings. It's what's gotten me to this point. I love AA 12-step philosophy. There's always that one person, they get up to get a cup of coffee, and half the meeting goes with them. And they come and sit down, they get up to go to the bathroom, and the other half goes with them. It's like, that's who I want as my sponsor. He or she's like a planet, and everybody's these little moons circling around them. Okay? Be selfish. If somebody's sponsoring 428 people, when are they going to have time for you? Just because you're sponsoring a lot of people doesn't mean they're going to have, again, and I've seen people say, well, I'd love to have him or her as my sponsor, but they don't sponsor anybody. Again, maybe nobody's asked. A sponsor is a guide. He or she's a teacher. I tell folks all the time, and I'll end this segment on this, so much of recovery, whatever tool we choose, is about staying teachable. The minute you know it all, we're in trouble. If you're looking for somebody to be a sponsor and you find the person that knows everything there is to know about sobriety, run the other way, because they're sicker than we are. Okay? Person doesn't have to have all the answers. They just need to have a few more than we have. These are very critical things, and we have some choices. Inpatient, outpatient meetings. Okay? In the next segment, we're going to talk about the medication piece that we can use and use to help turn down the volume on cravings and that kind of thing. And then again, the last segment that we'll do in a little bit, we'll focus on the internal triggers, or I'm sorry, the internal tools. So we'll end for right now, and we'll come back in a little bit and do the third segment. So.